There's a village in the mountains of Nagano, Japan, where the local doctor once complained that he had very little to do. Not because the village was small, because the people living in it refused to get sick. Men and women well into their 80s were tending their own rice paddies, walking steep hillside trails, preparing meals from scratch every single morning, and doing it all with the kind of energy that most 40-year-olds in the Western world can no longer claim. Scientists who arrived to study them didn't find a medical mystery. They found a kitchen, no exotic supplements, no anti-aging protocols printed from the internet, no expensive interventions of any kind. Just the same foods their grandparents had eaten and their grandparents before them, going back further than written records can trace with clarity. And when researchers began isolating the compounds inside those foods, running them through cellular models, testing them in clinical trials, and comparing the biology of these communities against the biology of populations eating modern Western diets, what they found was not subtle. It was staggering. Today, I'm going to take you through the 20 Japanese superfoods sitting at the center of that discovery. Foods that modern science is now proving slow cellular aging, rebuild the gut from the inside out, protect the brain against the decline that most people accept as inevitable, and keep the cardiovascular system running with the efficiency of something decades younger than its calendar age. Stay with me, because number 12 on this list is a fermented root that Japanese coastal communities have eaten every single morning for over 1,000 years, and clinical immunologists are now calling its active compound one of the most potent natural modulators of the human immune system ever identified in food. And number 17 is a tiny black seed that Japanese elders have been grinding into their meals since the Edo period, and longevity researchers are calling the specific lignin compound it contains a potential key to the aging clock itself. If you want the ancient science of living well delivered straight to you every single week, hit subscribe right now and ring that bell. Let's begin. 1. Natto. There is no comfortable introduction to natto. It arrives sticky and dark, trailing threads when you lift it with chopsticks, carrying a fermented smell that stops most Westerners before the first bite. Japanese grandmothers do not apologize for this. They have been eating it every morning of their lives, and they look extraordinary doing it. Natto is whole soybeans fermented with a bacteria called Bacillus subtilis, a process that transforms an ordinary legume into something that functions more like a pharmaceutical than a food. The enzyme this fermentation produces, natto kinase, is a fibrinolytic compound, meaning it actively dissolves fibrin, the protein scaffold of blood clots. Clinical studies have demonstrated that natto kinase reduces blood viscosity, improves circulatory flow, and lowers the measurable risk of the thrombotic events that kill more people in the aging world than almost any other single cause. But the clot-dissolving enzyme is only the opening act. Natto is one of the only food sources on Earth of vitamin K2 in quantities the body can actually use. K2 is the nutrient that activates the proteins responsible for routing calcium away from arterial walls and directing it into bone. Without K2, calcium deposits where it should not and disappears from where it must. The result in populations deficient in K2, which is most of the Western world, is arteries that harden and bones that hollow. Japanese populations eating natto daily show measurably better outcomes on both fronts. The probiotic activity from the Bacillus subtilis strains that survive digestion contributes to gut microbial diversity in ways that many commercial probiotic products simply cannot replicate. 1 fermented food. 3 distinct anti-aging mechanisms. Eaten over rice with a raw egg every morning, not as medicine, just as breakfast. 2. Matcha. Before matcha appeared in chain coffee shops and trendy cafe menus across the world, it was the centerpiece of one of the most deliberately cultivated cultural practices in human history. The Japanese tea ceremony was not decorative. It was a philosophy expressed through action, stillness, attention, the practice of being completely present for something small and finding in that smallness something enormous. What the participants of that ceremony were drinking the entire time, it turns out, was one of the most potent concentrations of plant-based antioxidants ever consumed by a human population. Matcha is not brewed tea. It is the entire leaf, shade-grown for 3 weeks before harvest to drive the plant's production of chlorophyll and EGCG, then ground to a fine powder and consumed whole. Epigallocatechin gallate, the polyphenol that makes green tea one of the most studied plants in nutritional science, is present in matcha at concentrations up to 10 times greater than in a standard green tea infusion. Its documented effects include the activation of autophagy, the cellular recycling process by which the body identifies damaged components, dismantles them, and rebuilds from the salvage. Autophagy is now understood to be one of the central mechanisms of biological aging. It slows with time. EGCG stimulates it. Japanese monks were drinking it before meditation for centuries, not knowing what autophagy was, only knowing that the tea kept the mind clear and the body light in a way that nothing else matched. The science eventually arrived at the same place they did. 3. Miso. Walk into a Japanese household at 7 in the morning and you will encounter miso soup. Not occasionally, every morning. It is not a choice or a preference. It is a foundation, as non-negotiable as the day itself. And the centenarians of Okinawa, the elders of Nagano, the sharp-minded 90-year-olds of fishing villages along the Pacific coast have all been beginning every single day this way for their entire lives. Miso is made by fermenting soybeans, sometimes with barley or rice, using koji mold and salt in a process that can last months or years. What emerges is a living paste of extraordinary enzymatic complexity. The lactobacillus strains it carries contribute to gut microbiome diversity, and gut microbiome diversity is now one of the most reliable biological predictors of healthy aging identified by modern research. It produces the precursors of serotonin and dopamine. It trains and modulates the immune system. It communicates directly with the brain through the vagus nerve in ways researchers are still mapping. The isoflavones in miso support bone mineral density and cardiovascular protection as the body ages, and Japanese women who consume fermented soy daily show measurably lower rates of osteoporosis than populations in cultures where fermented soy is absent. A bowl of miso soup is not a health decision. It is a civilizational habit accumulated over centuries by people who recognized, without any biochemistry to explain it, that this food kept them well. 4. Okinawan purple sweet potato. For most of the 20th century, this single root vegetable accounted for more than 60% of daily calories for the population that held the highest concentration of centenarians on Earth. The people of Okinawa were not eating it because they had read a study. They were eating it because it grew in their soil, because their grandmothers cooked it, because it tasted sweet and satisfying and filled the body in a way that lasted. And while they were eating it, they were quietly achieving something that nutrition researchers would spend decades trying to explain. The purple sweet potato, called beni-imo in Japanese, draws its color from anthocyanins, the same class of antioxidants that make blueberries and red grapes subjects of longevity research worldwide. These compounds reduce oxidative stress at the cellular level, protect the lining of arterial walls, and have demonstrated anti-inflammatory effects directly linked to the measurable slowing of biological aging. Despite its sweetness, its glycemic index is moderated by fiber content that feeds gut bacteria and stabilizes blood sugar over hours rather than minutes. Its vitamin A, vitamin C, and B6 concentrations support immunity, skin integrity, and neurological function simultaneously. What the traditional Okinawan diet demonstrated to the scientific world was this: the most powerful anti-aging food on the planet is not rare, exotic, or expensive. It grows in the ground. It requires no processing. It simply requires that you eat it every day for your entire life. 5. Wakame seaweed. The ocean is the most nutrient-dense ecosystem on Earth, and no food concentrates its chemistry more efficiently than seaweed. Wakame, the dark green sea vegetable that floats in every bowl of miso soup and dresses countless Japanese salads, is a product of cold, deep water where minerals accumulate in concentrations that land-based agriculture can no longer match. Its iodine content is the headline. The thyroid, which regulates metabolism, body temperature, cognitive function, and cardiovascular rhythm, cannot operate without iodine. Hypothyroidism is epidemic in modern Western populations, contributing to fatigue, weight gain, and cognitive slowing that accelerates the felt experience of aging long before the chronological age justifies it. Japanese populations eating traditional seaweed-rich diets have among the lowest rates of thyroid dysfunction in the industrialized world, and that is not a coincidence. Wakame also contains fucoidan, a sulfated polysaccharide unique to certain brown algae species that has been studied for anti-tumor activity, immune system modulation, and antiviral properties. Japanese coastal communities have been consuming it with dinner for centuries, while pharmaceutical researchers are now paying considerable attention to it in laboratories. Beyond fucoidan, wakame delivers calcium, magnesium, folate, and a spectrum of trace minerals increasingly stripped from terrestrial soil. It arrives at the table in modest, perfectly dosed amounts as part of a varied meal, doing the work of the ocean quietly, efficiently, and beautifully. 6. Tofu. The Western framing of tofu as a flavorless compromise misses what tofu actually represents within Japanese food culture entirely. Tofu is not a substitute for anything. It is a staple protein in its own right, with 1,000 years of culinary tradition behind it, and a nutritional profile specifically suited to the needs of aging bodies. Silken tofu, firm tofu, aged tofu, freeze-dried Goya tofu. Each form carries complete protein with all essential amino acids present. Maintaining muscle mass as the body ages is one of the most critical and most underappreciated determinants of long-term health. Sarcopenia, the progressive age-related loss of muscle, is directly linked to mortality, metabolic decline, insulin resistance, and loss of functional independence. The centenarians of Okinawa were eating tofu daily. The isoflavones genistein and daidzein, the primary active soy compounds, activate estrogen receptors in ways that support bone density, cardiovascular protection, and skin collagen synthesis in aging women without the risks associated with pharmaceutical hormone replacement. Japanese women experience measurably lower severity of menopausal symptoms than their Western counterparts, and researchers have attributed a meaningful portion of this difference to lifelong isoflavone consumption. Tofu is low in saturated fat, gentle on aging digestive systems, and adaptable to every form of traditional preparation that preserves what it contains. 7. Sardines. Long before fish oil capsules existed, Japanese coastal villages were eating small whole fish, bones and all, grilled fresh over charcoal, simmered in dashi, dried and eaten as snacks between meals. Sardines, called iwashi in Japanese, are as fundamental to the traditional coastal diet as rice, and the case for eating them whole is, it turns out, exceptionally strong. The omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, are the biological foundation of the connection between oily fish consumption and the consistent outperformance of fish-eating populations on every measurable marker of brain aging and cardiovascular health. DHA is literally a structural component of brain cell membranes. When it is abundant, neural communication is more efficient, inflammatory damage is blunted, and the rate of cognitive decline measurably slows. This is among the most replicated findings in nutritional science, and sardines are exceptional within the category because they are small, short-lived, and low on the food chain. They accumulate virtually no mercury while concentrating omega-3s at levels comparable to salmon. Eating them whole with their soft calcium-rich bones delivers calcium in a bioavailable form, with the anti-inflammatory omega-3 context enhancing absorption and amplifying the net effect on bone density. Their vitamin D supports calcium metabolism and immune function. Their selenium supports the thyroid and fuels glutathione production, the body's most powerful internal antioxidant. There is almost nothing a sardine does not address. The less done to them, the more they do for you. 8. Soba noodles. Before rice became the dominant staple of lowland Japan, the mountain communities of Nagano were eating buckwheat. In Nagano, It is worth noting, consistently ranks among the highest longevity prefectures in a country already famous for the length and quality of its lives. Soba noodles made from buckwheat flour are not a grain product in the botanical sense. Buckwheat is the seed of a flowering plant, unrelated to wheat, with a nutritional profile that diverges from true grains in ways that matter. It contains rutin, a bioflavonoid that strengthens the walls of capillaries and reduces the vascular fragility that becomes increasingly dangerous with age. As capillary integrity declines, blood pressure regulation deteriorates, bruising intensifies, and the risk of microhemorrhage quietly rises. Rutin addresses this at the structural level. Buckwheat also contains dichloroinositol, a compound studied for its ability to improve insulin sensitivity, reducing the glycation of proteins and tissues that is one of the primary biochemical drivers of biological aging. Its glycemic load is significantly lower than refined wheat pasta or white rice, delivering sustained energy without the blood sugar spikes that accelerate cellular damage. Serve cold with a clean dipping broth in summer and hot broth in winter, prepared simply and eaten with attention. The mountain elders of Nagano were not following a longevity diet. They were eating what their land had always produced, and their land had always been right. 9. Shiitake mushrooms. For more than 2,000 years, Japanese and Chinese traditional medicine prescribed shiitake for immune weakness, fatigue, and the circulatory decline that comes with age. They didn't have the vocabulary of immunology to explain what they were doing. But what modern immunology has found inside the cell wall of the shiitake mushroom suggests those ancient practitioners were operating with a precision that was simply ahead of its time. Lentinan, a beta-glucan polysaccharide extracted from shiitake, has been approved in Japan as an adjunctive cancer therapy since the 1980s. Beta-glucans activate macrophages and natural killer cells, the immune system's first and most aggressive line of defense, with a specificity that most commercial immune supplements cannot replicate. As immune surveillance declines with age, the risk of unchecked cellular mutation rises alongside the risk of chronic infection. Foods that actively upregulate immune vigilance are doing something that functions in the most literal biological sense as anti-aging. Shiitake also contains aritatinine, which reduces LDL cholesterol absorption through bile acid metabolism pathways, offering simultaneous cardiovascular and immune protection in the same ingredient. Traditional Japanese cooks were not trying to be clever. They were just cooking what worked. And the shiitake, dried and rehydrated in warm water, which releases beta-glucan compounds the fresh mushroom holds more tightly, was doing its quiet work in every winter soup pot for 1,000 years before anyone measured it. 10. Edamame. Half the longevity world is chasing exotic compounds from distant rainforests. The other half is eating edamame at sushi restaurants without giving it a second thought, which is a shame because edamame is quietly one of the most nutritionally complete plant foods available to anyone, anywhere at almost no cost. Young soybeans harvested before they fully harden deliver complete plant protein sufficient to support muscle protein synthesis, folate critical for DNA repair and methylation, fiber that feeds the gut bacteria responsible for producing the short-chain fatty acids that regulate immune function and repair the intestinal lining, isoflavones that protect bone and vascular tissue, and potassium that supports healthy blood pressure. The fiber content specifically deserves attention. Soluble fiber from legumes is one of the most reliable drivers of gut microbiome diversity, and microbiome diversity is now one of the most consistent biological correlates of healthy aging identified across multiple independent research populations. Every gram of that fiber is substrate for bacterial communities producing butyrate, the compound that heals the gut wall, reduces systemic inflammation, and communicates with the brain through the gut-brain axis in ways that affect mood, cognition, and the speed of neurological aging. Edamame is not a dramatic story. It is simply excellent food eaten regularly by people who live remarkable lives. 11. Goya bitter melon. Here we are at number 11, the one I mentioned at the top. And if you've never encountered Goya, the bitter melon of Okinawa, I want to prepare you properly, because this vegetable is not gentle. Goya is aggressively, intensely, almost confrontationally bitter. Western palates, calibrated to sweetness and salt, recoil from it on first contact. Okinawan elders eat it daily. They have eaten it every day of their lives, stir-fried with tofu and egg in a dish called Goya shampoo, grown in their own gardens, piled onto their plates without ceremony. And the regions of Okinawa with the highest historical Goya consumption have produced the highest concentrations of centenarians in the world. Here is what researchers found when they looked closely. Goya contains a compound called charantin, alongside polypeptide P and visine, that have demonstrated hypoglycemic effects in clinical models. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have shown that regular bitter melon consumption produces measurable reductions in fasting blood glucose and improvements in insulin sensitivity. Blood sugar regulation is not a concern exclusive to diabetics. Glycation, the process by which excess glucose bonds to proteins and systematically destroys tissue, drives skin aging, vascular stiffening, and neurodegeneration in the general population regardless of diabetes status. Anything that stabilizes blood sugar is, in a direct and documentable biochemical sense, slowing the clock. Goya is also rich in vitamin C, vitamin K, folate, and zinc, and its bitter compounds actively stimulate digestive enzyme production and bile secretion, improving the absorption of every other compound in the meal it accompanies. Traditional Okinawan medicine never drew a line between food and remedy. They were always the same thing. The bitterness is not a flaw to be removed. It is the signal. Every molecule that makes Goya work is carried in that bitterness. Eat it. 12. Daikon radish. Every traditional Japanese meal arrives with daikon in some form. Grated fresh alongside grilled fish. Pickled into brilliant white slices beside a bowl of rice. Simmered in winter stews until it becomes something rich and yielding and deeply flavored. Its presence is so constant, so unremarkable, that most people eating it have long since stopped noticing it. That is the precise signature of a food that has been doing its work quietly for a very long time. Daikon is a cruciferous vegetable, and like all cruciferous vegetables, it contains glucosinolates that metabolize into isothiocyanates and indoles, compounds that activate the liver's phase 2 detoxification enzymes and have documented anti-carcinogenic properties. The enzyme myrosinase in raw daikon activates these compounds on contact, which is why grated raw daikon served beside grilled or fatty foods is not a garnish. It is a functional digestive preparation refined over centuries of intuitive observation. Daikon also contains digestive enzymes including amylase, diastase, and esterase, which break down starches and fats and reduce the metabolic burden on the pancreas over a lifetime of meals. Reduced cumulative pancreatic stress across decades translates to better metabolic function as the body ages. Its vitamin C supports collagen and immune function. Its folate supports cellular DNA repair. And its fiber, both soluble and insoluble, feeds gut bacteria and supports the bowel regularity that older populations consistently struggle to maintain. Daikon does not announce what it does. It simply does it reliably in every meal, in every season. 13. Umeboshi. Umeboshi is one of the most extreme foods in the Japanese culinary tradition. Intensely sour, aggressively salty. A single small pickled plum carries enough acid to completely reorient your relationship with flavor in the first second of contact. Japanese grandmothers eat one every morning with rice and miso soup. They have done so without interruption for their entire lives. And the biochemistry of what that daily ritual is doing to the body is not trivial. The ume fruit, which is more closely related to an apricot than a Western plum, undergoes a preservation process involving salt and traditionally red shiso leaves that transforms its chemistry significantly. The resulting umeboshi contains citric acid in concentrations that are extraordinary among whole foods. Citric acid has documented antimicrobial properties and alkalizing effects on the body's internal environment following digestion. a process that reduces the inflammatory acidic burden that accumulates in the tissues of aging bodies. Japanese soldiers carried umeboshi for centuries as both electrolyte replacement and digestive stabilizer under conditions that would destroy most foods. The compounds released through the fermentation process stimulate digestive enzyme production and appetite, making umeboshi the perfect morning primer for a system about to receive the first meal of the day. One small plum every morning for a lifetime. The simplicity of the habit is part of the point. 14. Kombu. Kombu is the reason Japanese food tastes the way it does. It is thick, dark kelp harvested from the cold, mineral-dense waters of Hokkaido, and when simmered in water, it dissolves glutamate into the liquid, producing the deep savory quality called umami that defines the flavor foundation of Japanese cuisine. Dashi, the broth that begins almost every Japanese dish, is made from kombu. Almost everything starts with dashi, which means almost everything starts with kombu, which means almost every Japanese meal is quietly delivering a spectrum of minerals that modern Western diets almost entirely lack. The iodine in kombu is among the most bioavailable dietary sources of this critical thyroid mineral in existence. The calcium, magnesium, potassium, and trace minerals transfer into the cooking liquid and arrive in the body through the food they flavor. Kombu also contains fucoidan in concentrations even higher than wakame, alongside alginic acid, a gel-forming fiber that slows gastric emptying, stabilizes post-meal blood sugar response, and binds to heavy metals in the gut, facilitating their removal. In an environment more chemically contaminated than any previous generation has lived in, that binding function may be one of the most relevant longevity properties in the entire Japanese food tradition. Kombu is typically removed from the broth before eating. It does its most important work through the liquid it creates. It never announces its presence. It simply makes everything around it better. 15. Sesame seeds. In Japan, sesame seeds are not a garnish. They are a daily constant, ground into dressings, pressed into oils, scattered over rice and vegetables, incorporated into the small side dishes that accompany every meal with the same reliability as the meal itself. Goma ae, vegetables dressed with ground sesame paste, appears on Japanese tables the way olive oil appears on Italian ones, with a frequency that ensures its cumulative nutritional effect is significant rather than incidental. Sesame contains sesamin and sesamelin, lignins that gut bacteria convert into compounds with documented estrogen-modulating, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant activity. These lignins have been studied for their ability to reduce LDL oxidation, lower blood pressure, and protect the liver from the oxidative stress that accumulates with age and environmental exposure. The fat content of sesame is predominantly unsaturated with a fatty acid ratio that supports rather than disrupts the body's inflammatory balance. It's vitamin E, delivered primarily as gamma-tocopherol rather than the alpha-tocopherol in most supplements, provides antioxidant protection specifically against reactive nitrogen species, the inflammatory molecules that alpha-tocopherol alone cannot neutralize. And its mineral density is extraordinary. 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds deliver more bioavailable calcium than a glass of milk, alongside zinc, magnesium, and copper in concentrations that address the micronutrient deficits that become increasingly consequential as the body ages. Ground, toasted, pressed into oil, eaten daily in every form, sesame has been working quietly at the foundation of Japanese longevity since before the Heian period. 16. Yuzu. Yuzu is not a common fruit in Western markets. It is small, yields relatively little juice, and carries a fragrance so complex and layered that lemon and lime together cannot approximate it. That fragrance alone has been the subject of aromatherapy research demonstrating measurable reductions in cortisol simply from inhalation. But the nutritional case for yuzu is built on something deeper than its extraordinary scent. Yuzu carries a vitamin C concentration exceptional even among citrus fruits, alongside hesperidin, nerotinin, and a specific flavonoid called yuzu flavone with documented anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, and blood pressure-lowering properties in clinical research. Its limonene content, concentrated in the peel, activates the same liver detoxification enzyme pathways that support the body's processing of environmental toxins. The chemical burden that accelerates cellular aging in every population exposed to the modern world. Vitamin C, present in the quantities Yuzu delivers, is the rate-limiting factor in collagen synthesis. Without consistent adequate vitamin C intake, the body cannot maintain the collagen matrix that keeps skin firm, arterial walls elastic, and joint cartilage functional. These are precisely the tissues that show both the most visible and the most dangerous deterioration with age. Japanese aesthetic tradition treats yuzu with a reverence that borders on spiritual. The peel is used in winter solstice baths. The juice appears in sauces, cold noodle broths, and fermented condiments year-round. The instinct behind that tradition is biochemically correct. 17. Black sesame seeds. This is the one I mentioned at the very beginning, and it deserves its moment. Black sesame seeds are not simply a darker version of the white sesame seeds already discussed. They are a nutritionally distinct food with a polyphenol profile significantly more concentrated than their lighter counterpart, and they have been used in traditional Japanese Kampo medicine specifically for the treatment of age-related decline in hair, vision, kidney function, and vitality for well over 1,000 years. Edo period Japanese texts describe black sesame as the food that nourishes Jing, the foundational life essence whose depletion defines aging in traditional Eastern medicine. Modern nutritional science has not adopted the concept of Jing, but it has identified something interesting inside the black sesame seed. Sesamol and anthocyanin compounds in concentrations that exceed white sesame significantly, alongside a lignin content that delivers the gut-converted compounds associated with reduced all-cause mortality in multiple large prospective studies. Black sesame oil is extraordinarily rich in linoleic acid and oleic acid in a ratio favorable to the anti-inflammatory fatty acid balance that characterizes the diets of Japan's longest-lived communities. Eaten as a paste stirred into rice, ground into dressings, mixed into traditional sweets, consumed daily throughout a lifetime. Longevity researchers studying what distinguishes Japanese dietary patterns from those of other aging populations keep returning to the small, consistent, cumulative details. Black sesame is one of those details. 18. Kabocha squash. Kabocha is Japanese pumpkin. Dense, sweet, deeply orange in a way that communicates with precision its extraordinary carotenoid content. Beta-carotene, which the body converts to vitamin A, is present in concentrations that support skin integrity, immune vigilance, and visual health in ways that become increasingly critical as the body ages. But kabocha is not simply a beta-carotene delivery vehicle. It contains alpha-carotene, a carotenoid that human epidemiological studies have associated with measurably lower overall mortality in a finding that holds across multiple independent cohort studies involving hundreds of thousands of participants. It contains lutein and zeaxanthin, the carotenoids that accumulate in the macula of the eye and serve as the primary dietary defense against age-related macular degeneration, currently the leading cause of blindness in older adults globally. Eating kabocha regularly is, in a documentable and direct sense, protecting your vision decades before the threat arrives. Its fiber supports gut health and blood sugar stability. Its potassium supports blood pressure regulation. Its vitamin C compounds with the carotenoids for a synergistic antioxidant effect on skin that builds protection from the inside. Simmered in sweet soy broth until it collapses softly, roasted until caramelized at the edges, added to tempura in autumn when the season is right. Kabocha is sweet enough on its own that it requires no added sugar, serving as the satisfying dessert note in a meal built around everything the body needs. 19. Sencha green tea. If matcha is the concentrated ceremonial expression of Japanese green tea culture, sencha is the daily practice. The lived daily practice of 120 million people, brewed fresh multiple times a day from loose leaves in small clay teapots. Consumed from morning until evening without the self-consciousness of a health ritual, because it is not a health ritual. It is just tea. It is just what you do. Sencha is brewed from the whole leaf steeped in water, kept below boiling to preserve its catechin content. It delivers EGCG alongside a complementary spectrum of catechins, including epicatechin, epicatechin gallate, and epigallocatechin, compounds that appear to have synergistic effects when consumed in their natural ratios that isolated catechin supplements cannot fully replicate. The theanine in Sencha crosses the blood-brain barrier and promotes alpha wave production, the cognitive state associated with calm, focused alertness. The ritual of brewing and drinking tea multiple times daily is itself, neurologically, a practiced interruption of the chronic stress response. Lower chronic cortisol means slower adrenal aging, more consistent sleep quality, and reduced background inflammatory signaling throughout the body. Large-scale Japanese population studies linking green tea consumption to significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and cognitive decline are not preliminary or contested. They are among the most carefully replicated findings in nutritional epidemiology from one of the most extensively studied populations in the world. The elders of Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan's green tea heartland, drink Sencha from sunrise to the last hour of the evening. They have done so their entire lives. And Shizuoka consistently produces some of the longest-lived people in a country already famous for producing them. 20. Sukmino, fermented pickles. And here we arrive at number 20, the one that requires context to understand correctly, because the word sukmino covers significant ground and not all of it equally. Sukmino simply means pickled things. And within that category exists a profound distinction that determines whether you are eating one of the most powerful probiotic foods in the traditional Japanese diet or simply a flavorful vegetable preserved in vinegar. Traditional lacto-fermented sukmino, vegetables fermented in rice bran beds called nukazuke that develop living bacterial cultures over days and weeks, are genuine probiotic foods in the same category as sauerkraut and kimchi. The bacterial populations they carry colonize the gut transiently, contribute to microbiome diversity, and produce short-chain fatty acids that reduce systemic inflammation and repair the gut lining that deteriorates inevitably with age. The vegetables themselves, typically cucumber, daikon, carrot, eggplant, and turnip, retain their fiber through fermentation, providing additional substrate for the beneficial bacteria that need it most. Vinegar-pickled sukmino, by contrast, are preserved through acidification rather than fermentation. They are not probiotic, though they remain high in fiber, low in calories, and meaningful contributors to digestive variety and enzyme stimulation at the beginning of a meal. What sukmino represents in the full context of Japanese longevity is something more important than any single compound or mechanism. It represents a cultural habit of consuming fermented and preserved vegetables as a daily, non-negotiable presence at every meal. Not as a specialty health food, not as a supplement, as the small dish of color and brightness that has come alongside the rice at every Japanese table for over 1,000 years. Morning, noon, evening. Every day, every season, for a lifetime, 20 foods. Thousands of years of unbroken daily practice. A civilization that did not separate food from medicine, agriculture from culture, or the morning meal from the intention to live well. Here is what I want you to hold on to when you leave this video. The elders in those mountain villages and coastal fishing communities were not following a protocol. They were not measuring macros or reading clinical trials or making health decisions. They were cooking what their grandmothers cooked, eating what the land and sea offered, moving through their days with the quiet confidence of people who had always known, without needing to be told, what keeping the body well actually required. Natto every morning, miso with every meal, seaweed in the broth, bitter melon in the stir-fry, green tea from sunrise until the light fades. And modern science, with its cellular imaging and randomized controlled trials and genome-wide association studies, keeps arriving at the same conclusions those grandmothers were already living by. Fermented foods build the gut that regulates everything else. Small fish build the brain and protect the heart. Bitter compounds activate the detoxification pathways that clear the chemistry of aging from the body. Purple and orange foods protect the cellular machinery that deteriorates fastest. These things were not discovered in a laboratory. They were confirmed there. And before you close this video, quality matters here as much as it matters anywhere. Natto that has been properly fermented from whole soybeans is not the same product as heat-treated stabilized versions processed for mass export. Sencha brewed fresh from loose leaves at the right temperature is not the same as green tea extract encapsulated in a supplement. Traditionally lacto-fermented sukmino made in a rice bran bed is not the same as vegetables flash pickled in commercial vinegar brine. Every food on this list has a real version and a shadow version. The real version is what centuries of Japanese culture was built around. The shadow version is what industrial food production calls by the same name. Drop a comment below and tell me which one surprised you most. Are you Team Natto, Team Bitter Melon, Team Black Sesame? I read every single one. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button now and ring the bell. We're here every single week. See you in the next one.